Attention startup leaders. Are you strapped for time but hungry for strategic insights? Introducing Managed Chaos, your go-to podcast for navigating the startup world in less time than your morning commute. Join us as we share expert advice, real-world examples, and actionable strategies to help you scale your business, allocate resources effectively, and achieve visionary results. Tune into Managed Chaos and join a community of like-minded innovators on the path to entrepreneurial success.
GTM, or go-to-market, is a key function for any business, and today we are exploring the vital components of the sales, product, and other operations that drive your go-to-market success. Welcome to Managed Chaos Podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today we're getting into go-to-market operations. So first, to start us off, what are the key operations that need to be in place for a successful go-to-market strategy?
Isn't that just, it's really the question, right? Because I think, you come up with an idea and then you've got to figure out, wait a minute, how do I actually take this product to market? What am I supposed to do with it? And it really comes down to the same things that we talk about for everything, right? A clear process, understanding what the logistics are, whether you have a physical product or a software product, effective cross, functional communication. How do you define all of those workflows and create the handoff points between different departments? And where I've seen this fail often is where each department has their own go-to-market process, but there's actually no point where they all come together and where you understand how things lead into others. And so, for instance, we had a client who was creating a new product. It turned out that that new product required every customer who was going to use it to sign new T's and C's. But legal didn't know that until the week before the product was about to launch. And so we had to delay the product launch to make sure that we could figure out how we were going to get these customers to even sign the new T's and C's and what that could look like. Whereas if we had had more cross-functional alignment ahead of time, when you started conceptualizing the product, you could have informed legal, made sure they were already making updates, get things signed, and then hit the ground running, rather than having a product sit on the shelf because all the other aspects of that, delicate dance weren't ready at the time that we wanted to actually launch the product. Mm-hmm. And so, regular meetings, making sure that you have integrated project planning, making sure that sure, you might have a marketing plan and you have a product plan and you've got, a sales plan, but how do all those plans actually come together and who's leading that? And so in some cases, I've seen product operations lead that. In some cases, it's the product marketing person who's kind of taken on those reins because they're the person who kind of is at the end of this, probably not like, I'm trying to think of a phrase to use that's actually work appropriate, but they're the person who's under that umbrella that's catching everything coming down. And so they're, by default become the project manager. But how can you make sure that all of those cylinders are firing and that every team knows what they're doing and that it's happening in the right timeline? Because I think oftentimes, especially with software products, you end up with a product sitting on the shelf because there's other things that need to happen before your team can actually sell it.
Yeah, I think this is a really great place to start. Making sure everybody is on the same page and making sure that all of the different roles are really defined. There was a study done several years ago now. I mean, this is probably like more than 10 years ago. I'm showing my age with the business stuff. But the study was done on a hospital team, a surgical team, and figuring out how to be more efficient. And long story short, they basically discovered that if they hyper-defined everybody's role at all moments, just like in NASCAR, when you do a pit stop, everyone has such a specifically defined task. Excuse me. So with that, they implemented the same thing and just saw errors go down, better products, better outcomes, and happier, more successful surgeries. And so, I think it's so much the same in these business contexts, but because we don't have the time constraint like a pit stop, or we don't have the urgency of accuracy like a surgical room, we almost lose track of where we should spend our time and coordination. And we kind of fiddle-faddle around instead of getting really specific. So before, we kind of move on from this, I'd love to dig in a little deeper with you and say, okay, great. So then how do you really effectively coordinate that? And like, what's the how behind that? Like, where do people start to make sure that as they start to build out a real go-to-market plan, strategy, they know that everybody has their role and it's clear?
So I want to go back to something you said as well. I think we tend to not want to pigeonhole people and really like define their role down to the millisecond, like you would in a surgery or in a pit stop, because we think they don't want it. But in reality, I think that's actually what people really do want. They want to know explicitly, what are they responsible for? What is their requirement? And what I've done in the past is, there's one thing, which is finding the data, understanding what it looks like. The other thing is really the cross-functional meetings and ensuring that the right people are in the room where they are the owners of the task, not the high-level folks, right? And so it really has to be getting together the people who are the doers, the people who are actually creating and flipping switches and doing the things that need to happen, but making sure that that meeting is very efficient because it's expensive. And so in the past, what we've done is potentially only do that for certain products that we know are sort of bigger and that we want to either make a bigger splash for, or that there's more concern about. And essentially you have those meetings for those products. All the steps are still happening for other smaller products. They're just happening more asynchronously. And the team is kind of updating dashboards or having all that information in one place, but they're not actually, coming and having to present out. Also doing the pre and post mortems, I think, is really important. And so thinking about your product launch from a pre-mortem perspective, how is it going to fail? And really opening up so that your team can talk about, hey, I think this could go wrong, or this has gone wrong in the past and might go wrong here. And giving them the space to actually tell you how it's going to fail so that you can pre-plan for that and fix it before it happens. And then post-mortem, right? Learning. What went well, what didn't go well. And these types of meetings are expensive meetings. They're expensive from a time perspective. They're expensive because the people who are in them are typically paid a lot, but the learnings that come from them are extremely valuable and will save you time and money on your next launch.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting plug to have a pre-mortem. I learned early on in my career that executives do not want to hear a naysayer. That they do not want to have someone in the room that's like, well, what about this thing? It'll make it not work. So I'm just going to advocate for a second that leaders find trusted people to be naysayers, but then put it into a context of, okay, here's our moment. This is the meeting where we're going to talk about everything going wrong. Now, how do we make a plan for that? I think I would love to see that as part of every single project I work on. That would utterly delight me. I would love that. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, how does product development specifically, so now kind of honing in on different parts of this go-to-market team, how does product development impact the success of go-to-market? And what are some of the best practices that these companies should use to align their development with marketing needs? Because it's really where it all starts, is with product.
It does all start with the product, but I would actually argue that it starts with the market research before it starts with the product. So it's really going and understanding what's happening in the market, creating that customer feedback loop, understanding your voice of customer, actually talking to them, figuring out what their problems are, and ensuring that your product marketing person is actually in those conversations. So if the product team is talking to the customer, have marketing there, because they can listen for those keywords. They can listen for the things that they're going to want to use in that marketing campaign in the, once you actually launch the product. And so it loses something in translation when product says, well, the customer said this. And then, by the time it gets to marketing, it's kind of dull and not as exciting as it would have been had they heard it directly from the mouth of the customer. So really getting also iterative development. So understanding that, and everybody is very big on agile these days, but understanding that the product you release is probably not the end result. You're going to constantly be changing it and making updates and ensuring that you've got the ability to talk about that in the market and that you've given your team those resources to, understand what changes they're making, what are fast follows, what might take a while. And again, that cross-functional. So aligning on what features are coming, what is the positioning in the market, doing competitive analysis, understanding, okay, how does this product compare to the other things that are on the market? How should we talk about that? What kind of messaging should we use? And then thinking about almost a win-loss analysis as well, right? So understanding, are we losing because of features? And if we are, what does our roadmap look like to get those features?
That's really smart. And I love that you're plugging marketing, because that's my world. And I could not agree more that it's a very important partnership, product and marketing, and having kind of that customer stay together. So we'll do a whole second, like part 2 about that part of this discussion. But I love that you're basically saying that, well, let me put it this way. When I first started in technology, the foundation of my experience was in open source. And let me tell you, it's one of the favorite things that technology has brought me, or that is about my experience, because there's these unique ideologies that come out of open source software that I think are incredibly valuable for almost every other kind of business. And the one that specifically made me think of is this concept of release early, released often. Mm-hmm. And so often I see leaders that just really hold back on wanting to even let's just say versioning, right? Like putting out an alpha version, and they're really hesitant. But the truth is that the sooner you get it into the hands of people that can give you feedback, even in an imperfect state, yep. Is sooner that you can get it to a place where it has extreme value for your business and in a monetary sense. And so I think that is a really good mentality for leaders to take, small startups to take specifically, that yes, do the work, do the research and the conversations, but you'll never arrive at a perfect decision. So what does MVP look like? What's the most valuable product you can offer right now? What's that stage 1 look like? I think that's smart advice. And
I love the MLP, right? The most lovable product. So not even necessarily that it's only viable, but will your customers actually like it, right? So if you give them something that's viable, but they don't love it, what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. So then we talk a little bit about product. We talk a little bit about marketing, which we'll dive in more in our part 2 episode. But how can sales operations be optimized to support this kind of cross-functional team that's assembling?
So I think sales ops has actually become, and revenue operations, whatever you want to necessarily call it, has become a lot more popular in the last few years. And I think that's because of the need to actually create that alignment. So salespeople can't just go out and sell anymore. And I know that's going to upset a few people, but let me explain. So there's definitely some infrastructure there. There's analytics, there's process, but there's also salespeople have to actually understand how to use the product and how a customer might engage the product. And in many cases, products are getting a lot more complicated. And so having sales enablement and having people who can actually train the team, not necessarily they don't need to be the product person, but they need to be able to talk to the customer in a way that makes the customer confident that that person knows the product, they understand how the product solves their problem, and they actually can potentially use it and demo it. And I think, that shows the usability of your product. It shows how easy it is. If your salesperson is going in and can't do a rough demo of the product, if as a customer, you're going to be worried, well, maybe it's actually really hard to learn. And, if they need a professional to come in and give me the demo, that seems complicated. And so starting to think through, how are you tracking the performance metrics of your sales team? How are you training your sales team? How are they actually using the CRM? And what does that process actually look like? So, you could have a Salesforce full of, information. And if no one's going into Salesforce and pulling that data and looking at it and seeing what is your time to close, how many touch points typically happen until you get to a sale, right? How many different marketing webinars does someone attend before they finally sign up with your product? How long does it take someone to get a second product or a third product that you have, right? And what does that mix look like? What's the ideal customer to cross-sell to? There's a lot of things that I think teams need to unlock by looking at that sales optimization and the sales operations. Because if you ignore those things, you might be missing out on some easy revenue within your go-to-market process.
Yeah. And, some of that almost sounds like once you go live, these are things that you need to pay attention to. But I think that it is wise to look at that and have a plan for that before you even launch into market. How are you going to handle this infrastructure? Do you have it in place? I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to where they make an assumption that data is available only to find out after the fact that it is not. And now they're running behind, right? Now they have to wait X number more weeks, months, period of time in order to get that, to be valuable, to action, to make improvements. And so I think having those conversations, looping in the sales operation team, such an important step to really making sure everyone's coordinated together. I love that. That's great. Well, I'm going to remember this MLP. That was the first time I've actually ever heard that. Most lovable product. Here we go with the go-to-market strategies and planning. This has been the Managed Chaos podcast, and we hope to hear from you again. Go ahead and leave us a comment or subscribe to our podcast, and we will see you next time.
This was another informative episode of Managed Chaos, the podcast for startups. You can find us on all of your favorite podcasting apps, as well as on Instagram and YouTube, where we are at Managed Chaos Podcast. For additional resources or to continue the conversation, you can find Katrina Purcell and Rachel Anderson on LinkedIn.